thank you everybody so much for having me. Hare Krishna. I'm very grateful to be asked to try and share something. I'm not normally able to attend the Bhagavatam class because of my work schedule. And I don't love it when I don't love the feeling of just kind of parachuting in to give a class and then leaving again and not being able to listen. So please forgive me for that. And also I just wanted to share that I've only given Srimad Bhagavatam class a handful of times, so I'm still a little new to this. So please do feel free to jump in at any time with any questions or corrections or comments. And thank you again for having me. So with that, let me share my screen. Okay. So if somebody can just confirm that that's come through. Yeah, okay. So we'll be reading today from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 8, which is called The Withdrawal of the Cosmic Creations, and Chapter 14, called The System of Universal Management. So we'll be reading verses 1 to 4. So I'm going to go ahead and read the first 3 verses only in English, and then for the 4th verse, we'll go ahead and do it in Sanskrit as well. Okay? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, so verse 1. Maharaj Parikshit inquired, O most opulent Shukadev Goswami, please explain to me how Manu and the others in each Manvantar are engaged in their respective duties and by whose order they are so engaged. Verse 2. Shukadev Goswami said, the Manus, the son of Manu, the great sages, the Indras and all the demigods, O king, are appointed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his various incarnations such as Yajna. Verse 3. O king, I have already described to you various incarnations of the Lord, such as Yajna. The Manus and others are chosen by these incarnations, under whose direction they conduct the universal affairs. In text 4, so we'll go ahead and read the Sanskrit here. Chatur yugante kalena kristan shruti ganan yatha tapasar shayo pashyan yato dharma sanatana. So we'll read the word-for-word translation together. Chatur yuga ante, at the end of every 4 yugas, Satya, Dvapar, Treta, and Kali. Kalena, in due course of time. Grastan, lost. Shruti ganan, the Vedic instruction. Yatha, as. Tapasa, by austerity. Rishaya, great saintly persons. Apashyan, by seeing misuse. Yataha, wherefrom. Dharmaha, occupational duties. Sanatana, eternal. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Jai Srila Prabhupada. At the end of every 4 yugas, the great saintly persons, upon seeing that eternal occupational duties of mankind have been misused, re-establish the principles of religion. Purport. In this verse, the words dharma and sanatana are very important. Sanatana means eternal, and dharma means occupational duties. From Satya Yuga to Kali Yuga, the principles of religion and occupational duty gradually deteriorate. In Satya Yuga, the religious principles are observed in full, without deviation. In Treta Yuga, however, these principles are somewhat neglected, and only 3/4 of the religious duties continue. In Dvapar Yuga, only half of the religious principles continue, and in Kali Yuga, only 1/4 of the religious principles, which gradually disappear. And in Kali Yuga, only 1/4 of the religious principles, which gradually disappear. At the end of Kali Yuga, the principles of religion, or the occupational duties of humanity, are almost lost. Indeed, in this Kali Yuga, we have passed through only 5,000 years, yet the decline of Sanatan Dharma is very prominent. The duty of saintly persons, therefore, is to take up seriously the cause of Sanatan Dharma and try to reestablish it for the benefit of the entire human society. The Krishna consciousness movement has been started according to this principle. As stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam 12.3.51, Kaler dosha nidhe rajan asti yeko mahan guna kirtanad eva krishnasya mukta sangha param vraje. The entire Kali Yuga is full of faults. It is like an unlimited ocean of faults. But the Krishna consciousness movement is very authorized. Therefore, following in the footsteps of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who 500 years ago inaugurated the movement of Sankirtan, Krishna Kirtan, we are trying to introduce this movement according to superior orders all over the world. Now, if the inaugurators of this movement strictly follow the regulative principles and spread this movement for the benefit of all human society, they will certainly usher in a new way of life by reestablishing Sanatan Dharma, the eternal occupational duties of humanity. The eternal occupational duty of the human being is to serve Krishna, Jivara Swarupa Haya Krishna Nitya Das. This is the purport of Sanatan Dharma. Sanatan means Nitya or eternal, and Krishna Das means servant of Krishna. The eternal occupational duty of the human being is to serve Krishna. This is the sum and substance of the Krishna consciousness movement. Okay. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitantam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakapatarubhishta Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So the fourth verse, once again, at the end of every 4 yugas, the great saintly persons, upon seeing that eternal occupational duties of mankind have been misused, reestablish the principles of religion. So thank you once again for having me. I really did appreciate this purport by Srila Prabhupada very much. And it seems that today, more than ever, it is a little hope-giving, because the backdrop of the world today, as we all know, we're currently in the midst of a global pandemic, racial injustice, terrorism, natural disasters, leaders of countries who are cheating their citizens, incredible division even within families, a climate crisis, and an overall lack of morality. I have found myself feeling like this is the worst that Kali Yuga has ever been. And it's terrifying because we're still just in the beginning. But actually, when I look back into history, one of the realizations I've had is that this time it's not unique. It feels like it's the worst in our lifetime, and that's probably true. But in the age of Kali, we have had pandemics before. There have been holocausts and genocide and war. And so the words of the Shastra are again just proving to be true, that the age of Kali has always been a time of great quarrel and hypocrisy. In his preface to the Srimad Bhagavatam, I think Srila Prabhupada says it best when he says that there is a pinprick somewhere in the social body at large, and therefore there are large-scale quarrels, even over less important issues. In this day and age, There's no desire for people to even think about God, what to speak of to try to please him. And in fact, most people are trying to compete with God. The level of anger and hypocrisy in this day and age is just unparalleled. So this is all characteristic of the age of Kali. Kali is the force that predominates the lower nature of the whole of humanity. So in the Bhagavatam, in the first canto, in chapters 16 and 17, it's explained about the appearance of Kali. So we'll just kind of review that today. So once upon a time, the personality of religious principles, Dharma, he took the form of a bull, and 3 of his legs were gone, and he was kind of getting around on one leg. And one day he met the personality of Mother Earth, who was in the form of a cow, and she was crying. So the bull, Dharma, approached the cow, Mother Earth, and he asked her, "What's the matter? Are you upset because now I'm only standing on one leg? Are you upset because you're soon to be, and you all already are, being exploited by meat eaters? Are you upset that the women and children of this world are being neglected and exploited? Or because of the misbehavior of people who claim to be Brahmins, or the complete loss of Brahminical culture?" So she had so many reasons to cry, and Dharma was asking her, "What is it? What is making you upset?" So the cow, or Mother Earth, she replied, "Krishna has closed his transcendental earthly pastimes, and therefore the age of Kali has spread its influence everywhere. And so I'm thinking of myself, the earth, and I'm also thinking about you, Dharma, and I'm missing my Lord, Krishna. I'm missing him so deeply." So while the earth and Dharma were speaking in this way, Maharaj Parikshit kind of arrived on the scene. He reached the shore of the Saraswati River, where this conversation between the cow and the bull was taking place. And when he got there, he saw a Shudra arrive on the scene who was dressed like a king, who started to beat the cow and the bull, Mother Earth and Dharma, with a club. The bull was standing on his one leg and he was trembling in fear. And Mother Earth, the cow, she was hungry and she was weak, and her legs were also beaten by this personality. So of course, at that time, when there was any kind of injustice or hurt, the emperor of the land would personally take care of it. So King Parikshit approached this person and he said, in his roaring voice, he said, "Who are you? And how dare you injure and bring injustice to personalities who are under my protection?" And then he ran to the bull and he kindly asked who he was. And he said, "How did you lose your legs?" And he also inquired from the cow what had happened to her. So once Maharaj Parikshit understood who they were, he said to the bull of Dharma in the first canto, chapter 17, verse 24, he said, "In the age of Satya, or truthfulness, your 4 legs were established by the 4 principles of religion: austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. But it appears now that 3 of your legs, austerity, cleanliness, and mercy, are broken. And they're broken due to rampant irreligion in the form of pride, lust for women, and intoxication. And now Kali, quarrel personified, is trying to destroy your remaining leg of truthfulness." So Parikshit Maharaj, he immediately took up his bow and his arrows to kill this personality of Kali. And as soon as Kali saw this, he abandoned the dress of a king and he surrendered to King Parikshit. And so Parikshit Maharaj was known to be incredibly compassionate. So out of compassion for Kali, he didn't kill him, but he did ask him to leave. And so Kali said, "But where should I go?" And so Maharaj Parikshit said, "You can go live in places, anywhere where there is gambling, drinking, prostitution, and animal slaughter. Anywhere where those things are performed, you can go." But Kali wasn't satisfied by this, because he said, "In your kingdom, under your rule, no one could even dream of these activities. So please, there's nowhere for me to go. Please tell me somewhere else so that I can go and reside." So Parikshit Maharaj, again, out of his compassion, he said to him, "Okay, you can go and live wherever there is gold, or the hoarding of wealth, because wherever there is gold, there is also falsity, intoxication, lust, envy, and enmity." So these are the 5 places where Kali resides. So places where there is gambling, drinking, prostitution, and animal slaughter, and anywhere where there is the hoarding of wealth or gold. Sounds like everywhere to me, but especially sounds like New York City. So there's no doubt about it that this is the domain of Kali, and it will always be a place of corruption, and it will always be a place of hypocrisy. And again, we're seeing that in the world today. As part of my community group at the Bhakti Center, we're reading this book, Brilliant as the Sun by Krishna Dharma Prabhu. And this particular volume is a summary of the first canto of the Bhagavatam. And he explains in a nutshell what the age of Kali will look like. So I'll just read a quick paragraph to you all. He says, Sutta Goswami starts to explain some of the abominable conditions of this age. He says, animals will be slaughtered mercilessly. Children, women, and the elderly will be neglected and abused. Neighbor will cheat neighbor. The earth's fertility will gradually reduce, and there will be no rain. Rice, wheat, milk, sugar, and other staple foods will eventually disappear. At the end of Kali Yuga, if a person lives for 20 to 30 years, he will be considered an old man. People will be foolish and readily cheated by false religious teachers. They will be persecuted and overtaxed by the government, so much so that giving up hearth and home, they will run to the forest and hills in disappointment and confusion. And in the end, mothers and fathers will eat their own children. So it's depressing and it's terrifying, but we can see that 2020 has seen this rapid acceleration of the age of Kali, and some of these things are already happening today. There was a time when nobody could have ever imagined that animals would be killed to be eaten. Just like today, we can't imagine a parent killing his or her child to eat them. There was a time when nobody could have ever imagined the kinds of things that are happening in the world today. And again, I think all of us are particularly pensive and reflective in this age, or in this year, 2020, where everything seems to be kind of accentuated. So the breaking of the four principles is what seems to make the world go round. As it relates to intoxication, we know that alcoholism and substance abuse are massive pandemics around the world, and they have been probably for all of our lifetimes, if not much, much longer. And meat eating is the norm. And in fact, some people don't even think about meat eating as killing. I remember speaking to a child in my family whose father was feeding him meat, and I didn't hold back. And I said to this child, I think he was only maybe 5 or 6 at the time. And I said to him, do you love animals? And he said, yeah. We talked about going to the zoo and going to farms. And I said, do you love the chickens? And he said, yeah, I love the chickens. And I said, well, why then do you think you can eat the chicken when mommy or daddy puts chicken on your plate? Probably wasn't my place to say that, but I wanted to say something. And in response, you could see he was disturbed. And he said, wait, the chicken in the farm is different than the chicken that they put on my plate. And I said, no, it's the same thing. They take the chicken that has a mommy and a daddy, and people kill him so that you can eat him. And at 6 years old, he asked me to stop talking about it because he couldn't handle it. There was a disconnect between the animal at the farm and the animal on his plate. And that is still true today as adults. Many people, they cannot connect that these animals are being killed mercilessly in order for their own sense gratification. Of course, illicit sex is the basis for everything. Sex, desire, gross or subtle, is there in all of our advertising. It's there in the big buildings that we see manifested in our city, in the way we're programmed to value ourselves, and in the lyrics of songs. When I was growing up, and I was just always really into pop music, and I was kind of addicted to it. And then it wasn't until my nephews were born. My oldest nephew is now 10 years old. And when they were little, we used to turn on the radio and have dance parties at home. And it was then, when my kids were a little old enough to start listening to the radio and singing and dancing along, that I realized how atrocious the lyrics to pop music are. I guess I never really thought about it before. And all of the music that we listen to, it's all about these exact 5 places where Kali resides, and they're glorified. It's all about winning at the casino, It's all about sex and alcohol and sense enjoyment. It's about wearing gold chains and spending money at the club. It's just exactly about the age of Kali, and again, kind of glorifying it. And gambling is also just a way of life. It's an addiction that can cause people to lose their entire fortunes in just minutes. And so again, wherever these four things are taking place, Kali is king, and he will create envy and pride and anger and so on. And it will all culminate in hatred and quarrel. So Prabhupada says that there is no possibility of peace unless and until we completely get rid of these five activities. I've always thought it to be kind of fascinating that these five activities are exactly what they think is bringing them happiness. And they judge us devotees and aspiring devotees for not engaging in these activities. I remember as a young girl when I was in school, some of the kids would be shocked if I told them that I've never eaten a hamburger. And even as grown-ups, people think it's crazy. They always ask, well, where do you get your protein? And what, you don't drink? It's shocking for them because this is just the norm. But as we all know, these regulative principles, which sometimes can feel, especially in the beginning, very constraining. I remember when I first heard that these are actually to be known as the regulative principles of freedom, because by refraining from these activities, we're actually liberated from their control over us. I remember there's this lovely story of when His Grace Shyamasundar Prabhu was carving the Jagannath deities. I believe it was for the San Francisco temple. He had a pack of cigarettes that he was resting on. I think it was Lord Balaram's head as he was carving the deities. And Srila Prabhupada, when he saw that, in his kindness and his compassion, he didn't lose it. He didn't get mad at Shyamasundar Prabhu, but he said, don't let this little thing come between you and Krishna. This little stick that has some nicotine in it can control us. It can come between us and Krishna. So again, wherever there is the hoarding of wealth and an excess of gold, automatically these other sinful activities can follow. So when we become completely intoxicated by wealth, utilized for our own greedy purposes, we actually come directly under the control of Kali. We become a puppet in his hands. And this is his plan. This is what he is expecting us to do. He is creating this environment. And again, the song lyrics and the culture and the world where we feel we are of value when we have the most money. And frankly, we live in a world where, the government treats us in such a way where if we don't have money, then we can't survive. So we're rigged both ways. It's kind of a lose-lose situation in the age of Kali. So again, it's just a matter of time before the other vices come into your life when you start off by becoming kind of intoxicated and meditating on wealth. So again, we're always going to be puppets. And so we have a choice to make. Do we want to be puppets in the hands of Kali? Or do we want to be puppets in the hands of Krishna and Guru? So Radha Swami speaks about how you can walk down the street, especially in New York City and in Mumbai, and he says that you can see that people are puppets. You can see that Kali is just manipulating and maneuvering people. Maybe we even see that with our own family members. But people just don't realize that somebody else is pulling the strings. They think that they're acting under their own free will, and that they're just going about the world and enjoying themselves. And they have no idea that they are being controlled by advertisements, by the modes of nature, and by their own bad habits. And this is all just Kali doing his job. He is propagating the destruction of human value and religion, human values and religion. He's literally out there canvassing for his cause, and he appears everywhere and he's there all the time. And we as devotees, we're not immune. So Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita in the 15th chapter, verse 16, he says, Kshara sarvani bhutani, in the material world, every person is fallible. So we too are subject to the influence of the age of Kali. So therefore, it is integral that we consistently have very strong devotee association. And not just any devotee association, but like-minded devotee association, because without it, it's just impossible to resist the influence of the age of Kali. Of course, Krishna's mercy is there. But again, we are not immune to the influence of the age of Kali. And it's so nice that association is the key. We have to be so careful about who we associate with. And of course, we're working and we're, whatever we're doing in our lives, we are always having the association of others who are not necessarily devotees, practicing devotees of the Lord. And we should just make sure that when we're always conscious of whether we are taking association or giving association. We have to be very careful about the association that we take, and not just with people, but also with the movies that we watch, the TV that we might watch, the music that we listen to. We have to be very careful about the kind of association that we're taking in, because once again, it's so subtle how easily Kali can influence and kind of take over our consciousness without us even realizing. So in the purport to this verse, verse 4, Srila Prabhupada says, "The duty of saintly persons, therefore, is to take up seriously the cause of Sanatan Dharma and try to reestablish it for the benefit of the entire human society." And he also says, "Now, if the inaugurators of this movement strictly follow the regulative principles and spread this movement for the benefit of all human society, they will certainly usher in a new way of life by reestablishing Sanatan Dharma, the eternal occupational duties of humanity." So it's said that where there is the greatest need, there is also the greatest opportunity for mercy. So in this day of quarrel and hypocrisy and great irreligion, Krishna extends his most compassionate and munificent mercy to all of us. And he actually makes it so easy. So in Satya Yuga, people had to live for, I think it's 60,000 years in a solitary place with total control of their mind and senses in order to realize God. And I know I'm speaking for myself, where I can say I don't think I've ever had complete control of my mind and senses for even a minute. It's just a different time. We are less capable, of course. So Krishna gives the same result of 60 years of meditation to anyone who just takes to the process of chanting Hare Krishna. So it's crazy. All that he wants us to do is chant this mantra with some attention and to try to share the mantra with others. So this is why, despite the craziness of the world that we're experiencing so intensely this year, 2020, the reason we can't be in person associating with one another, it's because Kali Yuga is so intense, but still, because of this access to this great mercy, Kali Yuga is actually the most worshipable of all ages, because all we have to do, again, is chant with attention to get God's mercy. And honestly, chanting with attention is hard for us too. I can certainly speak for myself. So let's try to take advantage of this time that we're in, this time of great fear and depression in the world. And let's use it as an opportunity to really try our best to genuinely take shelter of the holy names. And we kind of say that. I know, having grown up in the movement, I hear this all the time. Let's take shelter of the holy names. Let's take shelter of Shastra. But I don't think I've ever really meditated on those words. Take shelter. Take shelter. What does that mean? I know that I find myself every day chanting mechanically, or just thinking like, this is something that I have to do because I made a vow. And it's not always because I'm genuinely trying to connect. And especially lately for myself personally, controlling the mind during japa has been very difficult, because just what's happening in the world, it is just very disturbing. So there are many things that can cause us to be distracted, and many reasons for us to feel upset or down. But if we can try to channel that into a genuine cry for Krishna, like a helpless child, as Prabhupada says, then Krishna will reciprocate in full. And that is who we are, actually. We are helpless children. We just forget to identify in that way, because it's so easy for us to think of ourselves as doers and controllers. So the consciousness with which we chant, it will attract a particular quantity of Krishna's compassion and mercy. That's a Radha Swami quote. And so now we have access to that compassion and mercy, and it's actually considered to be violence if we're not sharing that with others. So in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 11, verse 33, Krishna encourages Arjuna to be nimitta matram, to just be an instrument. So this should be our meditation. In the midst of the craziness of the world today, how can we also be nimitta matram, instruments of Krishna's mercy and compassion? And Krishna is always grateful for any and every effort to serve him. So if we help to protect others from the wrath of Kali, then we too become protected. So again, nimitta matram, let's meditate on that. How can we be instruments of Krishna's compassion? And it doesn't have to be as big as, maybe going out on book distribution if that's not our thing. It could be being a good example and being good association for others. That's also us being an instrument of Krishna's compassion, trying to read the Shastra and trying to share it in ways that are non-threatening to people who are not practitioners of bhakti. That's also being an instrument. Trying to elevate people's consciousness to the mode of goodness is also being an instrument. So what can we do, big or little, big or small, to try to be nimitta matram, instruments? So I was recently listening to a lecture by Radha Swami, and I loved this one thing that he said. He explained that the Lord becomes furious when someone tries to exploit his devotee. And he gives the example of Prahlad Maharaj. And he says that there was one point that Hiranyakashipu had thrown Prahlad Maharaj into the ocean in an attempt to kill him. And the Lord appeared in an amazing form to save him. And I didn't actually know this, but he said that both Varahadev and Lord Nrsingadev appeared to save Prahlad Maharaj at the same time. And so they appeared as one, Varaha Nrsingadev. So I thought this was so sweet because of course we have Varaha Nrsingadev at the Bhakti Center. And so in this class, Radha Swami explains that this form of the Lord is so anxious to protect the devotees, which I thought was so sweet. But he says this deity of Varaha Nrsingadev in India, he's quite angry. And so to appease him, the devotees every day in the temple smother him with cooling chandan to appease the heat that's coming from this anger. So I'm sure that our Varaha Nrsingadev is not so angry all the time, but I just love the story because as we speak about the onslaught of Kali and the terrible happenings in the world today, we can rest assured that in our very home, the Bhakti Center, we have Varaha Nrsingadev to protect us. So let us take shelter of him, especially once again during this horrible time that we're all in, and let's try really to go deep inside, go deep into the holy names, go deep into Shastra, and try to actually understand the purport to the phrase, take shelter. Because for me personally, it's always just been a phrase. I've never really understood what that's meant. So let's chant and let's read as if our lives depend on it. Because actually they do, but we're just not always conscious or, we're just not always cognizant of that. So in conclusion, let's bring it back to the verses. So in chapter 13, the previous chapter, entitled The Description of Future Manus, Shukadev Goswami describes each Manu from the 7th to the 14th Manu. And then this chapter, chapter 14, is entitled The System of Universal Management. And so this this chapter begins with an inquiry from Maharaj Parikshit to explain the Manus, the duties that they are engaged in, and by whose order are they engaged. And in response, Shukadev Goswami says to the Manus, he says that the Manus, the son of Manu, the sages, Indra, and the demigods are all appointed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he explains how at the end of, he explains his various incarnations as well, the Lord's various incarnations. And in the 4th verse, Shukadev Goswami explains how at the end of the 4 yugas, at the end of Chatur Yuga, the saintly persons reestablish the principles of religion. And in the purport to this verse, Srila Prabhupada describes that this is the purpose of the Krishna consciousness movement, and that it is our responsibility as his followers to help reestablish the principles of Sanatana Dharma. So over the next few verses, Shukadev Goswami is going to describe the Manus in some more detail, as well as the different incarnations of the Lord in different yugas. So that is all that I had prepared for today. Thank you again for allowing me to speak, and I would love it if now we can spend the last 10 minutes, and please, if anybody has any comments or corrections or any questions, please chime in.
Thank you, Mother Radha Bhakti, for a crisp presentation, and especially it was very nourishing to hear how the basics of Krishna consciousness is so important. And also this purport was, as you were explaining, it's creating, like Prabhupada is like not just doing it like, okay, it's a spiritual movement, but it is almost sounds like a spiritual missionary. Like we're creating a new world order, like we will usher a new era of devotional like empowerment in the world, and then the change. So to hear that is like very inspiring. Okay, it's not just personally practicing, but also we are also contributing to the world in a way which is like which can bring social transformation. And and as you have been mentioning about the current scenarios, uh, there are two ways. Like one is like directly contributing to the things that are happening around us, and practicing bhakti is also in one way trying to correct those things. So how do we make sure our personal practice actually makes some impact or makes some change in the world?
The beauty of bhakti and of Krishna consciousness is we don't have to do anything other than focus. We don't have to then double check to see what we've reversed. Srila Prabhupada said actually that it's because of the presence of the Sankirtan movement. It's because of the devotees that we've avoided World War III. And so he said there was meant to be a third world war. And so he said that there's no way that we can underestimate the power of Sankirtan. So, and he says also that, I remember there was one quote, he said, you know, you're chanting your japa on your side of the world, and I'm chanting japa on my side of the world. And together we're creating this reverberation of the Maha Mantra. And we are actually moving the world. We are actually preventing natural disasters. We are actually preventing additional terrorism and war. And so imagine how important it is for us to just individually, just be sincere in our sadhana, be sincere in our practice. And if we can do that, then collectively we'll make a difference. What to speak of if collectively we're going out there and presenting bhakti to the world. There's nothing separate that we have to do. We can just, as Prabhupada said, we can just chant, sing, and dance and eat and go back to Godhead and bring other people back to Godhead as well. So it doesn't require any additional endeavor. So yeah, it behooves us to take this on for our own well-being, and in the process, we're looking after the well-being of the world. Prabhu, would you add anything to that? Gaurashan, Prabhu?
No, it sounds perfect. Like because like everything starts, the change in the world starts with change within ourselves. So it's a good reminder hearing from you today about like okay how the four regulative principles are actually agents of like not following them we become very susceptible to the age of Kali, the influences of Kali, and also like how all these things tie down up to like for us to helping us to take shelter of Krishna. And especially I loved the point when you said, what does it mean taking shelter of Krishna? We hear this very often, but when you said like, okay, hearing and chanting as if our life depends on it, as if my life depends, and you said yes it depends on it but we don't realize it, but realizing and being conscious how much our life depends on it and how much strength we derive to stand against the forces of Kali. So that's a practical way of looking at taking shelter of Krishna. So that's really an amazing addition for my meditation today. Thank you so much. We'll open it up now for more questions, otherwise I can ask some other questions.
I'll just say one quick comment to what you said. The following of the four regulative principles, you know, many of us are engaged in some kind of outreach, especially at the Bhakti Center, is so good at reaching out to newcomers. And one of the things that I've always said to people is, don't worry so much about the do nots. Don't worry about do not drink, do not gamble, all these things. Worry more about bringing in, adding certain things to your life versus taking away, because it's hard for people. And frankly, that's the attitude that I've had in my own Krishna consciousness. And studying for this class today just made me realize, it just kind of re-emphasized the importance of following the four regulative principles and trying to be strict, trying really hard to just understand that, again, just a little digression, a little transgression rather, can really bind us in the material world. One little thing, and Kali is waiting, Maya is waiting. So this, again, studying for this class made me kind of reinforce in myself the importance of following the principles. It's not to torture us, it's to save us and to help us save others and to stop the influence of the age of Kali. It's not a small thing. Thank you. I think, was it Yamuna Jaya, Mataji? Were you about to say something?
Hi, so good to see you.
Nice to see you.
I just wanted to thank you for class, and there was just something about the simplicity of the question, how can we be an instrument of Krishna's compassion? And I'm thinking it's such a great bookend of the day. Like every morning, like put the feet on the floor. How can I be an instrument of Krishna compassion today? And at the end of the day, before my eyes close, how was I, or did I have an opportunity and I missed it? And there's just something when you said it, it's such a simple thing to ask. And so one line thing to keep in my mind all during the day as I go through my activities before everything I do. How in this activity can I be an instrument of Krishna's compassion? Because when I was thinking it that way, there's so many opportunities. Like you said, it doesn't have to be book distribution. There's so many opportunities every single, like minutes every day. And keeping that little mantra in my mind, I think would be very, very helpful. So thank you so much for saying that.
Thank you so much. That's really inspiring. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments or corrections or reflections?
Hi, Bol, Radha Bhakti.
Hi,
So
Bol,
nice. So nice to hear your class this morning. I really, really appreciate it. I'm grateful that I could be present. I was meditating on this point that you made, how I like how you specified that it's not like as devotees, we're immune to the influences of Kali, and that we should especially be careful about how Kali influences us. And I was thinking of how that affects, to the extent that we allow Kali, whether we recognize it or not, to influence us, to that extent we can actually be less of an instrument of positive change in the world, in terms of like the quality of our hearing and chanting and our giving of bhakti to the world. But I was thinking, I recently heard in a lecture also by Radhanath Swami, he specified, it was like an old initiation lecture back from like the 90s. And it was really heavy. And he specified that for when you take initiation vows, that you should actually expect Kali to test you, and he mentioned 3 ways, and they were very significant, and I just wanted to share. He mentioned that that Kali and Maya will test our faith. Maya will test us by with laziness in our sadhana and our practice, and will also test us by giving us the most special arrangements of breaking regulative principles, in terms of like enticements. Like even if like we're not enticed in so many ways, that Maya will figure out just the special way to entice us. And I was like, it was just a very significant point that he made, that not that these things might happen, but that we should actually expect them to happen. And I was just reflecting on that in relation to your class, and it was very interesting. I really like how you mentioned that the significance of taking shelter and really trying to go deeper into understanding what that means. So thank you so much for the wonderful class. If there's anything you want to comment on top of that, that'd be nice also.
No, just thank you so much for sharing that. And I always think about that, how Prabhupada had said at one point that sometimes the onslaught of Maya in your individual life or in your particular situation is actually an indication that we're making some progress. Because when we're fighting the war and we fight hard, then they'll fight back harder. So every once in a while, again, that's an indication of progress. So I think it's really telling that Maharaj said that in an initiation ceremony, where you're taking this big step forward, but that doesn't mean that the tides are going to not push back on you. So we have to be on our guard at all times. So thank you so much for sharing that, Tulsi Rani.
Venkat Prabhu is in call and just wanted to add a comment. So
please. Haribol Venkata.
Well, Radha Bhakti, thank you so much
Hey.
for a really sweet class. And I just, I wanted to share something on the point about the four regulative principles. And it's something I've been reflecting on for a little while now, that actually in our tradition, the four regulative principles are really stated as positives. Our principles are actually compassion, truthfulness, austerity or discipline, and cleanliness, or sometimes purity. And the sort of the do nots are, in one sense, extensions of those positive principles that are particular ways of putting them into practice, particular ways of making them concrete and actionable for us. But for instance, if you look at, and I know there are some devotees who have done some really amazing scholarship on this and of research, the way Bhaktivinoda Thakur, for instance, the way he lays out the criteria for initiation, he very much stresses these the positive principles. So when we say, for instance, I'll choose a less politically controversial reg. When we talk about, for instance, like no gambling, the idea there is, yes, okay, no gambling in the literal sense, but also to really work on having that mindset of truthfulness, of not cutting corners, of not cheating and exploiting, right? And so in that way, I really love connecting that to the point you made about being instruments of Krishna's compassion, because then we look at the do nots more in the sense of, okay, these are opportunities I have to put these principles into practice and to be the best instrument that I can be, the clearest, most effective instrument of Krishna's compassion. I can still try to do that while performing activities that are not so aligned with these principles, but it's just going to be that much harder. I'm going to be such a less effective instrument of Krishna's compassion. So I just wanted to share that, and if you have any thoughts on that.
Nothing to add to that. I love that point, and thank you for saying that, because it is important for ourselves and also in our outreach to emphasize the positive. So yeah, thank you for saying that. It was just a reflection for me that I too tend to emphasize the positive, and again, just in preparing for this class, the do nots just became more important in my mind personally. But such a beautiful point, and thank you for rounding that out. It's amazing. Thank you.
The darshan is open, so we'll be going.